The Mississippi welfare scandal involving former NFL star Brett Favre is still unfolding. Axios now reporting Favre has hired former Trump White House lawyer Eric Hirschman as his lead counsel. Favre is suspected of pressuring Mississippi government officials to spend millions of dollars in welfare funds on a volleyball center at the school where his daughter played the sport. And our next guest reports newly uncovered text messages show that the University of Southern Mississippi had concerns about the grant-funded volleyball facility. Favre personally received, in addition to that, over $1 million in welfare funds to give speeches that he never actually made. He did repay that money. We should note he has denied any wrongdoing through his lawyer, and he has maintained that he did not know that the distributed funds were welfare funds at all. And at this point, he has not been charged with a crime. Joining us, Anna Wolf, reporter for Mississippi Today. Anna, you have done extraordinary reporting since the very beginning on this story, this scandal. If it wasn't for journalists like you, would any of this come out? Would Brett Favre still have that $1 million? Would we know nothing about this volleyball center? He'd just be living his big old life?
I think that's a really good question. You know, this story has kind of blown up here nationally most recently, but this story has also been out there for over 2 years. When they made 6 arrests back in 2020, we were the first to really make that connection between Brett Favre and this welfare scandal that was unfolding. When a company that he had been investing in and was trying to get the state to support him on was named in the indictments as having received $2 million in stolen welfare funds. I think a lot of this you could have seen be swept under the rug if it weren't for people staying on it.
Good for you. Then I have to ask you, if you've been working on this since 2020, what has been you or your team's interaction with Brett Favre? I ask because I've asked him to come on TV with me, I don't know, 10, 20 consecutive days, no dice. What has he been like with your team over the last 2.5 years?
We have not gotten an interview with him. You know, there was some text exchanged in the beginning where, you know, at the very beginning before he had been cited in an audit or, you know, the auditor was demanding that he make a repayment. We were talking to him about what conversations he had had with folks about either this pharmaceutical startup company that I mentioned that he had pressured state officials to be involved in, and then also the volleyball stadium that we broke back in February of 2020. We asked him if he had ever had any conversations with the governor about this volleyball project. And he said in a text message that he had not. He said no, which we now know based on text messages that have been released most recently that he indeed had conversations with the governor.
Pressured state officials in the poorest state in the country to invest in a pharmaceutical startup. All right, tell us about your new reporting, though.
Well, I think the big question as this story has progressed has been, you know, how much did Favre know about the source of these funds and what these funds were supposed to be spent on? And in the latest text messages that have just been released most recently, he at least knew that the funding came from a place that made the university nervous when he was talking about using these funds to build a volleyball stadium. That, in addition to the fact that they had to call this building a wellness center instead of what it actually was, which was a volleyball stadium. And they had to justify what they were doing by saying that it was going to serve, you know, however many people in poverty, I think gives some sort of indication as to the workarounds that they were trying to pull here, right? You know, but this is how the TANF program has worked for decades in states where they've wanted to sort of contort the mission of this welfare program in order to support them doing what they wanted with the money. TANF has a strict prohibition on states using the money for brick and mortar construction projects. And Favre actually uses the term brick and mortar in some of his text messages, saying that maybe Nancy New, the nonprofit founder that had been receiving a lot of this welfare money, maybe she could give it to a different entity who could then give it to the university to use on brick and mortar. Brick and mortar is kind of a funny term to be used there.
Then based on your reporting, how detailed Favre is in all of this, are you surprised that he hasn't yet been charged with a crime? He just got himself a big giant lawyer.
So the state made 6 arrests back in 2020. There has not been a single arrest since then. John Davis, the former welfare director, has finally pleaded guilty to federal charges 2 weeks ago. These are the first federal charges in 2.5 years that have been levied against someone. So, when you ask why haven't charges been filed yet, the feds do work slowly. They work quietly. We're just now seeing for the first time them charging someone 2 weeks ago. John Davis has pled guilty to those federal charges. He's agreed to aid prosecution. Prosecutors have said that they are now working up the ladder. Up the ladder from John Davis is former Governor Phil Bryant, who was his boss. The closest, the best evidence that we have about Phil Bryant's involvement in welfare misspending has to do with Brett Favre's projects. So I think we're just waiting to see, what prosecutors will do here.
And why are the texts only coming out now?
That's a good question. So within the state's civil suit, this is civil litigation that the state is bringing against 38 people or companies who received money improperly, and they're trying to claw that money back. Within that civil case, Nancy New, the nonprofit founder that I mentioned, has brought a subpoena against former Governor Phil Bryant. The governor is not a target of this civil suit, but they are subpoenaing his text messages to serve as part of her defense, because in her lengthy defense, she says that the governor in some cases directed her to make these purchases. And if the governor didn't even know that it was wrong, or the governor was willing to skirt these regulations, then, how can she be held to that standard? And so she has subpoenaed these messages. Bryant has objected to the subpoena, but both of them have now entered text messages within different filings in court to sort of give their side of the story. So Bryant is supplying all these messages that he say show that he didn't have any idea that they were using welfare money. Nancy has produced text messages between her and Brett Favre that show that the governor was involved in conversations prior to welfare money going to the volleyball stadium.
I've got to ask,
that is why you've seen this back and forth.
I have to ask, because we're out of time. As of last year, 21% of children in Mississippi live at or below the poverty line. But you are from a state where football stars are treated like gods. How do the people of Mississippi feel about Brett Favre right now?
Well, yeah, I don't think that it's very hard to understand how someone could be involved in doing this. It's hard to say that he definitely knew, that this was money that was supposed to be serving the poorest of the poor in Mississippi. But, this is what happens under conservative policies that prioritize sort of personal responsibility over true safety net supports, where they're basically more comfortable. It's less offensive to them to waste the money, to squander it, or give it to wealthy people than to actually give it to people in need.
Anna Wolf, the state of Mississippi is lucky to have your extraordinary reporting. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to keep covering this story right here this hour.